It was a crisp Saturday evening in the quiet suburban town of Brookville, New Jersey. The park, usually a sanctuary of peace, was alive with the soft murmur of families and the distant laughter of children. On this particular evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the grass, a sense of serenity hung in the air. It was the kind of evening where you could hear the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the trees, a perfect backdrop for the families enjoying their time together. Among those in the park was 16-year-old Jason, a solitary figure beneath a large oak tree near the edge of the field. His younger brother, Sam, was finishing his soccer practice, and Jason had promised their mom he would wait for him to finish before walking home together. Clad in a simple black hoodie and faded jeans, Jason sat on the bench, absorbed in a book he'd brought along. The world around him seemed far away as he turned the pages, the noise of the park blending into a distant hum. However, a rumble interrupted his focus. It was a familiar sound, a pack of motorcycles revving their engines, but this time there was something different about the noise. It wasn't the usual sound of passing bikers. This time the roar of the engines seemed deliberate, as though it carried an unspoken message. Jason's eyes barely flickered as he continued to read, but in the back of his mind, he felt the presence of something about to change. The bikers didn't just pass through the park. They slowed down, their engines rumbling louder as they made their way into the heart of the open space. As their bikes skidded to a halt, Jason looked up briefly, his gaze briefly meeting that of one of the riders. The way they looked at him, it was as though he was already marked, like they were sizing him up for something. Jason's stomach tightened, but he quickly turned his attention back to his book, trying to remain calm. He had learned long ago that letting fear control him was a path he could not afford to walk. The bikers parked their motorcycles near the soccer field, stepping off their bikes with purposeful strides. Dressed in black leather jackets and dark jeans, they seemed to stand in sharp contrast to the peaceful scene of families gathered on the green lawn. No one was laughing, no one was talking. Instead, their eyes scanned the park, each of them locking onto Jason with unsettling intent. It was clear that their attention was fixed on him. Something was about to unfold, but Jason wasn't sure what it was. What he did know, however, was that the calm he had tried to cultivate was about to be tested. Jason's fingers gripped the edges of his book, his mind racing as the bikers began to approach him. He didn't know why, but there was an instinctive sense of unease that spread through him like a cold wave. He could feel their eyes on him, even before the sound of their footsteps reached his ears. One of the bikers, a massive man with a shaved head, nudged his friend, signaling the group to move toward Jason. His heart began to beat louder, but he did his best to keep his face neutral, forcing himself to stay calm. "Stay cool," he whispered under his breath. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of the lessons she had instilled in him. "Stay calm. Don't let them see your fear. Always be aware of your surroundings." Jason knew that the closer they got, the more his training in martial arts would matter. He wasn't looking for a fight. Far from it. His training had always emphasized peace and self-control, but he had also been taught how to read situations, to anticipate when things were about to turn dangerous, and as the bikers neared, he could sense that something was wrong. The way they walked wasn't casual. Their movements were deliberate, calculated. The burly man in the front, who towered over the others, wore a look of aggression that was hard to ignore. It wasn't just their posture or the glint of menace in their eyes. It was the tension that seemed to crackle in the air, a silent threat hanging between them. Jason's mind moved quickly, assessing his options. He could stand his ground and see where things led, or he could try to defuse the situation. But he wasn't naive. He knew when someone was looking for trouble, and this group wasn't just passing through. They had made him their focus, and it was becoming increasingly clear that they weren't interested in friendly conversation. The first biker, a broad-shouldered man in a worn leather jacket, spoke in a voice that was low but sharp. "What are you doing here, kid?" His words were less of a question and more of a challenge, as though Jason's mere presence had somehow violated some unspoken rule of the park. Jason felt the weight of their gaze, the intensity of it, but instead of feeling fear, a quiet strength rose within him. He wasn't going to let them intimidate him. Slowly he closed the book, the sound of it settling on his lap. His fingers twitched, but he didn't respond right away. There was power in silence, in stillness, and right now, his calm was his most valuable weapon. "I'm just waiting for my brother," Jason said, his tone steady, his eyes never leaving the burly man's. He spoke with a quiet confidence that was not arrogance, but the kind of assurance that came from being comfortable in one's own skin. He was unarmed, but his years of karate training had given him a different kind of armor. Discipline, poise, and the ability to stay collected even in the most trying situations. The biker smirked, his eyes narrowing slightly as he exchanged a glance with his friends. "This doesn't look like your kind of place," he said, his words laced with something that Jason couldn't quite put his finger on. It was a taunt, a challenge, but also an attempt to unsettle him. Jason held his ground, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. He wasn't here to pick a fight, but he also wasn't going to let these men push him around. It was a public park, a space for everyone, regardless of who they were or what they wore. He refused to let them make him feel like he didn't belong. The tension hung heavy between them, and Jason felt his pulse quicken, not with fear, but with the anticipation of what was to come. He knew that the moment he let his guard down, everything could change. And he wasn't about to let that happen. The air around Jason seemed to grow thicker as the bikers moved closer. Their presence was no longer a simple nuisance, but a looming threat. Jason's instincts kicked in, and his training from years of karate began to surface. He had been taught to read people, to notice the small shifts in posture, the subtle changes in tone, and the rhythm of their movements. It wasn't about being afraid, it was about knowing when to act, when to anticipate danger. And these bikers weren't just walking toward him, they were closing in with intent, as if to surround him, to trap him. The burly man was the first to break the silence. He took another step forward, his boots crunching against the gravel as he leaned in slightly, his face just inches from Jason's. Jason could feel the heat of his breath, the weight of his presence pressing down on him, but he didn't flinch. He wasn't afraid. The burly man's words were low, almost taunting, as he sneered. "Got a smart mouth, huh?" His voice was gruff, and the hostility was unmistakable. Jason's eyes never left the man's face, unwavering in their calm intensity. He could feel the tension in the air, the moment stretched thin like a taut wire, ready to snap. But he wasn't about to let it. His mind raced, calculating, weighing his options. He had faced threats before, bullies, challenging opponents in sparring matches, even the occasional encounter where things had gotten heated. But this felt different. The bikers were not just looking for a fight, they were looking for submission, for fear, and Jason would not give that to them. With steady hands, he folded the corner of the page in his book, marking his place. The gesture, subtle as it was, grounded him. He wasn't going to allow this moment to unravel him. "I don't want any trouble," Jason said, his voice even but firm, a quiet resolve behind the words. He kept his posture relaxed, his body language non-threatening, yet his mind was fully alert, ready to respond in an instant if necessary. The burly man didn't seem satisfied with the answer. His lips curled into a sneer and he leaned in closer, his voice dropping into a mocking whisper. "Trouble? Who said anything about trouble?" The words were laced with sarcasm, each one dripping with menace, as if trying to provoke a response from Jason. Jason could feel the tension building in his chest, but he forced himself to remain still, calm. His heart was steady, his breathing measured. He didn't need to fight to prove anything. The bikers were trying to bait him, to test his limits, but he knew better than to let them see his emotions. He was in control of the situation, of himself. But even as he stayed grounded, he could feel the bikers pressing closer, their presence closing in around him like a tightening vice. They weren't going to let him walk away without a challenge. And that realization settled in Jason's mind. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore. It was a test of his will, his discipline, and his ability to stay true to the lessons he had learned in the dojo. Just as the air seemed to crackle with the electricity of an impending confrontation, a voice broke through the tension, sharp and clear. "Leave him alone." The words came from a small figure, a boy no older than 10, standing a few yards away from Jason. It was Sam, Jason's younger brother, his face flushed from the soccer game, his brow furrowed in concern. "Gordon, stay back!" Jason called, his voice calm but edged with authority. His brother didn't seem to hear him at first, his small feet moving forward in a determined stride. But the biker's eyes shifted toward Sam, their grins spreading as they turned their attention to the younger boy. The leader of the group, the burly man, looked down at Sam with a predatory glint in his eye. "This your brother?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Maybe we should teach you both a lesson." Jason's heart raced, not with fear, but with resolve. The bikers had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. This was no longer just about him. It was about protecting his brother, about standing up for what was right, no matter how outnumbered or outmatched he might be. Jason's body shifted, his muscles coiling in readiness. His hands, which had been resting loosely on his knees, were now poised in the stance he had practiced 1,000 times. His feet were firmly planted on the ground, his weight evenly distributed. He was ready, physically, mentally, and emotionally. "Don't touch him," Jason said, his voice low but filled with a quiet power that cut through the tension. It was a command, not a plea, and it hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. The bikers hesitated for a moment, clearly unnerved by the calm, confident tone in Jason's voice, but the leader, stubborn, arrogant, laughed, shaking his head as though Jason were nothing more than an inconvenience. "You think you're tough?" the burly man taunted, stepping closer. But Jason didn't flinch. He didn't need to. His confidence in his training, in his own strength, was all that he needed to stand firm. The bikers' laughter faded, replaced by the weight of their confusion. Jason had faced adversaries before, but he had never faced this kind of challenge, one that tested his mind as much as his body. But he was ready, and when the leader moved to shove him, Jason knew it was time to act. In that brief, pivotal moment when the burly biker took his first aggressive step toward him, Jason could feel the change in the air. The tension had reached its peak, a moment suspended in time where everything depended on how he chose to react. The bikers had underestimated him, underestimated the years of discipline and training that had shaped him into who he was. They thought they were dealing with an ordinary teen, someone easily intimidated, but they were mistaken. As the leader lunged forward with his hand raised, Jason didn't hesitate. Every fiber of his being was attuned to the moment, every movement choreographed by years of practice in the dojo. The biker's hand shot toward his shoulder, but Jason was faster. With a fluid motion, he shifted his body to the side, his movements precise and controlled, almost like a spring being released. The burly man stumbled forward, his forceful push dissipating into nothing as Jason's body darted out of the way. The crowd that had gathered at the edge of the park could only watch in stunned silence, as if they too were caught in the same web of disbelief. Jason moved with a calmness that defied the situation, his mind clear, his body in perfect harmony with the techniques he had honed over the years. The bikers were no longer the dominant force. They were now reacting to him. As they watched, he looked at them. Jason's palm struck the leader's wrist with a practiced strike, twisting his arm and forcing the man to release his grip. The biker grunted in pain, taking a step back, his expression contorted with rage. For a moment, the arrogance in his eyes wavered. He wasn't just dealing with a teenager. He was facing someone who knew exactly how to neutralize a threat. But Jason wasn't done. The other two bikers, seeing their leader's loss of composure, rushed forward, their anger clouding their judgment. The first swung a wild punch, aiming for Jason's head, but he ducked effortlessly, his body moving as though it had anticipated the move before it even happened. With a swift and controlled motion, Jason planted his foot and delivered a sharp kick to the biker's knee, sending him crumpling to the ground with a cry of pain. The crowd gasped, but Jason didn't stop there. The second biker hesitated for a split second, just long enough for Jason to pivot on his heel, spinning gracefully and landing a powerful kick to the side of his ribs. The blow was precise, calculated, and it sent the man staggering backward, gasping for air. Jason's movements were nothing like the brute force the bikers had expected. They had come to intimidate, to force fear into him, but Jason's calm and controlled reactions were proving to be their undoing. The burly leader, now red-faced with fury, charged again. His fists came at Jason in a barrage of wild swings, but Jason was light on his feet, never allowing himself to meet the man's heavy blows with brute strength. Instead, he dodged, each movement fluid and seamless, the rhythm of his training guiding him. The bikers couldn't keep up. Jason was too fast, too precise. Jason wasn't interested in proving how tough he was. His goal wasn't to hurt them, it was to disarm them, to show them that aggression met with discipline would always falter. The leader's punches were nothing more than the desperate swings of someone who had realized too late that their intimidation tactics wouldn't work. And then, just as quickly as it began, the fight shifted. The leader lunged again, this time attempting to grab Jason by the lapel of his jacket, a move that would have been intimidating to anyone who didn't know how to react. But Jason had anticipated this too. He twisted his body with grace, evading the grab, and in one swift motion delivered a powerful strike to the man's solar plexus. The impact was immediate. The burly man staggered back, gasping for air, his face turning a shade of crimson as his tough exterior cracked under the precision of Jason's calm control. The fight had gone out of him. He was no longer the aggressor. Jason had taken the upper hand with a quiet strength that left the bikers reeling. The two other bikers were still on the ground, one clutching his knee and the other gasping for breath, their faces contorted in pain. For a moment it seemed like the confrontation might end there. The air was thick with tension, but Jason's stance remained strong, unyielding. He didn't look angry, there was no malice in his eyes, just a quiet resolve. His voice rang out across the park, clear and firm. "Enough," the leader wheezed, holding his chest. But he didn't back down right away. Jason's expression was unreadable, but his calmness unnerved the man more than any punch ever could. Finally, the leader growled something inaudible and waved for his friends to retreat. The bikers limped back to their motorcycles, their faces marked by a mixture of anger and disbelief. The leader turned one last time, pointing a shaking finger at Jason, muttering a threatening, "This ain't over, kid." But Jason didn't flinch. He stood there, unwavering, as the roar of their engines began to fade into the distance. As the bikers disappeared from sight, Jason felt the tension release from his body. The crowd, which had been silent until now, began to murmur in disbelief and admiration. Jason's calm control had silenced the aggressors, leaving them with nothing but the sting of their own defeat. Jason's expression didn't change. He hadn't fought to win, he had fought to protect, to stand firm in the face of intimidation, to show that fear had no place here. And as the applause began, he knew that the fight wasn't just won with fists, it was won with integrity. The tension in the air was palpable as the leader of the bikers stumbled backward, gasping for breath, clutching his solar plexus where Jason's precise strike had landed. For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath, suspended in time. Jason stood firmly in place, his posture unyielding, his face calm but resolute. The bikers were no longer the intimidating force they once were. Their confidence had cracked like brittle stone, and their leader's red face reflected the sudden realization of just how wrong they had been. The moment had shifted. No longer did the bikers command the space around them. They were no longer the predators, no longer the ones with the upper hand. Jason, a young teen with nothing but the discipline of his martial arts and the strength of his resolve, had taken control. His calm, unshakable demeanor had unnerved them more than any act of brute force could have. The leader stood, his chest heaving as he glared at Jason, his pride wounded beyond repair. His eyes burned with a mixture of fury and disbelief, fury that he had been so easily outclassed, disbelief that a young boy had turned the tables on him so quickly. For a brief second there was hesitation. The bikers exchanged looks, the weight of the situation pressing down on them, as if they too were beginning to understand that they had miscalculated. Jason's voice broke through the tension, steady and commanding. The simplicity of his words, the finality in his tone, struck harder than any punch could have. The burly man, still holding his chest, took one last look at Jason as if debating whether to continue, but the fight had left him. His companions were down, one still clutching his knee, the other struggling to catch his breath. They had underestimated Jason's strength, his calm resolve, and now they had nothing left to prove. The leader's face twisted in frustration, but there was no more bravado in his voice. With a final growl, he waved his hand in a dismissive gesture. "Let's go," he spat, turning to his friends. And slowly they began to retreat toward their motorcycles, their movements slow and reluctant, as if every step they took was a defeat they couldn't quite shake off. As they mounted their bikes and revved their engines, Jason stood tall, unwavering. He didn't take his eyes off them, his posture still firm, but there was no anger in his gaze. His hands were relaxed at his sides, his breathing steady. He wasn't celebrating the retreat of the bikers, he was simply standing his ground, holding on to the quiet dignity that had carried him through this confrontation. The leader, as if realizing the full extent of his defeat, turned back just as the engines roared to life. His voice was barely audible, but the threat in his words was clear. "This ain't over, kid." His finger pointed at Jason one last time before he twisted the throttle and sped off, the sound of their motorcycles echoing through the park. Jason didn't flinch. He didn't respond. There was no need. The bikers had made their exit, defeated and humiliated. The crowd, who had been watching in stunned silence, began to stir. The soft murmur of voices filled the air, some people clapping in admiration, others shaking their heads in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Jason turned his attention back to his brother Sam, who had stood frozen during the entire confrontation, his wide eyes never leaving his older brother. The look of awe and concern in Sam's face made Jason's heart soften. He gave him a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine, Sam," Jason said, his voice calm, the earlier adrenaline now replaced by a sense of quiet strength. He reached down and ruffled his brother's hair, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. "Let's go home." As they walked away, the weight of the moment hung in the air, but Jason didn't feel fear. He didn't feel the need to prove anything. He had stood firm when it mattered most, not out of anger or a desire to fight, but because he knew that standing up for himself and for those he loved was the right thing to do. The bikers had retreated, but there was no doubt in Jason's mind that this experience had taught them something valuable, that strength isn't about size or intimidation. It's about discipline, self-control, and knowing when to walk away. Jason had been ready to defend himself, yes, but he had also known when the time had come to end the fight. As the two brothers walked home, the soft crunch of their sneakers on the sidewalk was the only sound that filled the space between them. Sam's glances at Jason were filled with a mixture of awe, admiration, and curiosity, and finally he spoke up in a voice barely above a whisper. "How did you do that?" he asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. "How did you take them all down like that? They were huge." Jason chuckled softly, shaking his head. "It's not about being bigger or stronger, Sam. It's about being prepared, staying calm, and knowing when to act." Sam was quiet for a moment, processing his brother's words. Finally, he nodded, the wisdom of the moment sinking in. "Yeah," Sam said, his voice thoughtful. "I get it." And with that, they continued their walk home, the quiet of the evening settling around them. But the lesson of that day, a lesson of strength, courage, and quiet dignity, would stay with them both for years. As Jason and Sam walked home, the quiet of the evening wrapped around them, the sounds of the park fading into the background as the world seemed to slow down. Sam's questions continued to buzz in his mind, but Jason remained calm, his thoughts focused on the lessons he had learned and the strength he had found in that crucial moment. Despite the physical confrontation, Jason had come to understand that the true battle wasn't about fighting. It was about standing firm in the face of adversity, maintaining control, and knowing when to act with purpose. What happened today wasn't just about defending myself, Jason thought. It was about knowing my worth and not letting anyone take that away from me. In a world where bullies, aggressors, and hardships could feel overwhelming, Jason had found his inner peace, his power rooted not in fighting, but in his ability to stay calm and grounded. Jason glanced down at his younger brother, still walking beside him but now with a quiet admiration in his eyes. Sam had seen what Jason was capable of, what it truly meant to stand up for yourself and for the people you care about. But what he didn't yet fully understand was that the courage Jason displayed wasn't just physical strength. It was the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your values, your boundaries, and your ability to protect them. "I'm proud of you, Jason," Sam said softly, his voice full of a new sense of respect. Jason smiled, the weight of the day's events still lingering in his chest, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done the right thing calmed him. He knew that his brother would carry this lesson with him for the rest of his life, and that, in itself, was more rewarding than any victory in a physical fight. As they neared home, Jason's mind returned to the bikers and the words of the leader, still lingering in his thoughts. "This ain't over, kid." The words were empty threats now, though. Jason wasn't afraid. The confrontation had taught him something invaluable. Fear only had power over you when you let it, and Jason had chosen not to. It wasn't about being the strongest, it wasn't about being the loudest or the most intimidating. It was about staying true to yourself and having the courage to stand firm no matter the odds. If this story has moved you, if Jason's calm, steady confidence in the face of danger has inspired you, take a moment to reflect on your own life. When have you had to stand firm? When have you been challenged, and what did you do about it? True strength lies in how we handle the storms of life, not in how we fight them, but in how we rise above them. If you believe in the power of staying true to yourself, if you've ever faced a challenge that made you feel small but still chose to stand your ground, share your story with us. We would love to hear how you've found strength in your own life. Please don't forget to like this video if you found inspiration in Jason's journey, share it with someone who might need that reminder of their own strength, and subscribe to our channel for more empowering stories. Your thoughts and experiences are important to us. Leave a comment below, and let's continue this conversation about what it means to be truly strong, no matter the odds.